just getting things going here. The classic startup sequence of trying to make sure everything's connected. We're good. We're good. Cool. I don't know. My streaming software says that LinkedIn Live is currently down. I don't know if that's the case. I kind of want to test it out. So I'm trying to see if I join it, do I see it happening? Looks like yes. So I don't know. The streaming software said, hey, it's down, like don't use it, but seems like that was a lie. But yeah, I think it's working. I think all the platforms are up and running. So sorry if you joined on YouTube because I told you LinkedIn wasn't working. I promise that wasn't some type of trick to get you onto, onto YouTube. I put a screenshot even on LinkedIn of the message that they were putting out. So I apologize for that. It does seem like it's working though, so that's good news. But as always, I want to remind folks that the chat is where I'll be looking for messages and stuff. I'm just double checking. Okay, I had to refresh the chat on my side. It said that like 2 entire platforms weren't working, but that's not the case now. So that's good. But yeah, please, as we're going through today's session and any live stream that you're on with me, please put messages in the chat. I am happy to be answering questions and kind of dedicating the time to whatever questions you have that are coming up in the chat. Like reminding people that I could be making YouTube videos that are recorded instead, and I would much rather spend this time like talking with you. So by all means, please do that. Another thing that I'll just call out too is usually I do these at 9 p.m. PST. I did a bit of a survey, and basically the majority of people, it's hard to pick a good time, but the majority of people were saying, please something earlier. So this is the something earlier that I'm trying out. Hopefully this time is okay. It should be a little bit better for people on the East Coast, but I realize it's still like 10 o'clock at night, so apologies for that. Hey, Nick Hodge, good to see you. Thanks for joining again. I appreciate it. So yeah, let me know if you're joining in or if you're watching the recorded version of this and you're like, hey, sucks now because the time doesn't work. Just let me know. I'm trying to find a better time. I think the earliest I can probably go though on a Monday is like 6:30 p.m. It just lets me make sure I can get back from work and stuff because I like to go to the office on Mondays. And I should also remind people that I am planning on doing a live stream tomorrow morning. I know I've been saying this for a while, but that is the plan. It should be at 7 a.m. PST. So hopefully there's other people that can make that. Otherwise, you can check out the recorded version. But tomorrow's live stream is going to be on trying to migrate. It's not going to happen all in one stream, just a heads up. It's going to be about trying to migrate my WordPress blog over to a Blazor blog engine. And I can't pronounce his last name, but Steven Geisel, perhaps. He's a pretty well-known .NET creator, has a popular blog and stuff. But he has this blog engine that he's been putting together. It's all open. You can check it out on GitHub. I think it's called link.net or something like that, like LINK. So anyway, I'm going to be doing that tomorrow morning. Infected FPS, good to see you. Yes, slightly earlier than normal stream, but maybe this is the new normal time. We'll see. So today's conversation is, like usual, based on my most recent newsletter. I'm just going to put a link into the chat. If you want to check it out, you're more than welcome to. I understand newsletters aren't for everyone, and this is why I try to put out as much content in as many different formats as I possibly can. So hopefully you find something that works for you. If you're here, maybe it's because the live streams work well for you. But yeah, try to post daily, try to make sure that I get a newsletter out once a week. I am not back to blogging as much as I'd like, so the newsletter is sort of the only blog post I've been doing for months now, just because I've been dedicating more time to coding to get a product and platform launch. So once that's more sustainable, I think that I'll try to get back to getting some blog posts out. So apologies for not kind of focusing on that. I do enjoy being able to write stuff up and help have explanations for people. So anyway, that is going to be the link to my newsletter. It's called well, the thumbnail says technically infeasible, and then it's really about destroying momentum for innovation. So we're going to be chatting through that. Again, if you've just joined, please feel free to use the chat, ask questions about anything you want, even if it's completely unrelated to the topic of the newsletter. So with that said, I'm going to try to dive into things. So this came up recently because I was chatting with a couple of friends about this concept, sort of in terms of like what I would call like true agility in software development. And I've also had a couple of things at work that have reminded me of this. So the beginning of this newsletter and what I'm going to be talking about is kind of like what I was doing before Microsoft, just so people have some context. If you've seen my live streams or my other videos and stuff, you might know my whole life story by now. But I am going to be kind of covering some of that ground first. That way you understand where I'm coming from, because I think it's important people understand this. Like, I'm just a dude on the internet, right? I have my own lived experiences. Like everyone else, I'm going to have biases about things. And when I talk to you about my experiences, I never want to come across like what I'm saying is the absolute law or the absolute truth. Like it's one way or no way. I want you to know that like I'm acknowledging my biases, and I want you to be able to think critically about what I'm saying. So this is just my perspective on things. So yeah, before Microsoft, I've been at Microsoft now for just over 4 years. And prior to that was working at a startup company. And the startup, I got to be there like from the time it was around 8 people. And then after 8 years, I had come to Microsoft. But that company had grown from around 8 people to like between 250 to 300 people. So it had grown pretty significantly. That's a pretty big, pretty big ramp up in staff. We didn't have at the time any external investment. So this is something that was just like natural growth. And I don't know, like that's pretty rapid growth in my opinion. I know that's 8 years, but like for not having capital injection and being like, here's, $100 million, go hire, all the engineers in the world kind of thing. It's pretty significant growth for just being, self-sustained. So from my perspective, a pretty unique experience, because I think sometimes people are at startups and they're there while it exists as a startup, and then they leave, they do something else. Sometimes startups don't make it, unfortunately. And other times people have joined companies after sort of like the time I left this company. Like you're coming in after that. So you missed the whole startup journey, and it's kind of like it's a small, medium-sized business at that point. But I got to go through like this really exciting journey of like, hey, this is a tiny company. We have no idea if this is truly going to work. So let's make it work. And then kind of proving after a few years, like, hey, it's working. So pretty cool experience. And let me just double checking some of the other points I wanted to make. I guess for context, so I think this is kind of important as we go into the other parts. The space that we were in was digital forensics. And while the specific space isn't that important to this conversation, the point I wanted to call out is that we were a startup in the digital forensic space, and there were already like 2 big companies, 2 primary companies, I would say, that for computer forensics had a complete monopoly over the space. Okay, so I'm not going to list the company names because it doesn't matter, but there were 2 companies that that truly had like, I don't know, like the entire market share. On Instagram, you're saying post this live. I don't necessarily know what you mean by post this live. And I'm looking at it from my computer, and I don't necessarily know how to do what you're saying there. Sorry. On TikTok, because that's not being to the coming to the shared chat. Did you get rewarded for being there at that important juncture? That's probably a conversation for a later date, but the short story is is no. And for brief context, because someday I'll probably talk more about this, but this was probably like arguably the worst timing of anything in my entire life. But I had left that company. Yeah, sorry, it's weird, but I had left that company because it was not public at the time. And the way the contract worked, I basically had to sell back my shares that I had. And when I sold back my shares, it wasn't even at the arguably what the latest valuation of the company would be. It was probably like 4 years stale. So I sold my shares back at um, a very small dollar amount. So yeah, I had a payout. Um, but that company IPO'd shortly after. They got bought back to private for $1.8 billion. That's with a B. And long story short, after a couple of stock splits, or it was like a triple stock split or something, if I would have stayed there, I would have never had to work again in my life. So probably financially the worst thing that could have possibly happened to me so far. There's still time to make worse financial mistakes, I suppose. But yeah, so that's kind of what happened there. The real answer that you probably want though is like, did you get rewarded for being there at that important juncture? No, but I was rewarded, I think, very fairly for my time there. I always felt that I was being compensated fairly. Towards the end, I was trying to say like, I don't think my salary is quite fair, and having conversations about that. And you know, like I had good working relationships with my manager and stuff, so it wasn't like a hey man, listen up or else. It was just like a genuine conversation about compensation and the trajectory of that. So that always felt good. And like I said, I felt like along the way, I've kind of said this before. I used to work like crazy. I'd work, you know, nonstop around the clock, and did this for years. And part of that was like I felt valued. Like honestly, I did feel valued. I know people are like, "Oh, all these companies, like we're a family." I'm like, "Yeah, we were a family at the beginning. When it was a small startup, we were absolutely like a family." And people don't like to hear it because they're like, "That sounds like bull crap." Like, I don't know. Sucks if you haven't got to live through it, but it was it honestly felt like working. I still have like some of my best friends are from that time. So to this day, right? So yeah, I think felt very rewarded going through it. But yeah, at the end, it was definitely having conversations about like salary compensation. It's very different, especially in the US. Maybe it's different for some other Canadian tech companies, but in the US, we talk total compensation, like sign-on bonus, salary, stock, like performance rewards, things like that. So there's different ways to factor it in. And I had stock at this company just from being an early employee, but really the conversation every year was just like, how do we incrementally increase the salary? And it was kind of reaching a point where I'm like, I'm reaching a point where I am no longer inspired to be working as much because it's becoming disproportionate. So that's kind of what it felt like by the end. But yeah, I still, you know, there's people there that absolutely will be friends for life kind of thing. So I don't have the video super handy. If you give me 1 sec, I'll try to pull it up. And I don't know if I can put links. So 1 sec, because I made a YouTube video about this, and I want to see if I can just search it on my channel quickly. But it kind of talks about my time there. So 1 sec. If the links don't work when I put them into the chat, then you can search for just the word promotions or principal level. Actually, promotions is probably one that'll work best. But you can check that out. Again, sorry if the link doesn't work. If you're not on TikTok and you want the link, it's that video right there that I just put into the chat. Oh, and then apparently I didn't know this for Instagram. Save it as a post after the live and so we can still view it. I don't get that option. Every time it tells me that I have to discard the video. So I apologize if you're on Instagram and you want to watch it later. It will be on YouTube. So some people are probably watching this in the future and it's on YouTube, so it'll be there. But yeah, thanks for the questions in the chat. I'm going to dive back to the article here. But yeah, if you have any more questions, please just ask. I'm a pretty open book. I think it's important to be transparent about things. So, okay. So yeah, the kind of the story that I was telling is that we had these two major competitors that had essentially a monopoly over all computer digital forensics. And we weren't even in the mobile forensic space at the time, but we had later, which I'll talk about, we had basically one company in like all of digital forensics that had an absolute monopoly over all mobile forensics. They were backed by like a multi-billion dollar Japanese company. Like they they were the company that did mobile digital forensics. So something interesting to talk about as we go through this. So something I wanted to call out sort of at the beginning of this is that I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think that we were successful as a company because we had smart people. Like, we did have smart people. We had great engineers. We had a great, sales marketing team. We had like, a lot of things had to line up, but I wouldn't say like, are there companies that have more smarter, so more in terms of number and smarter engineers or better engineers? Sure. Like, sure there are. I would say that's probably statistically very likely that that's the case. So I don't attribute our success as a company to just having like good software engineers. And certainly like when I started there, like there were probably at times like almost the same number of interns as full-time people. So we had lots of super junior people. The average age of the software engineer team was like pretty low. So it's not like we had like a stacked team, and it was like, in hindsight, we were making a stacked team. We had lots of people that became very awesome because they were awesome, but they didn't have like a 20-year career, like, doing digital forensics and all this like startup experience. So yeah, like we were kind of figuring things out. Hey, David, from YouTube, good to see you. What's good? How you doing? I'm doing pretty good. Live streams a little earlier. But yeah, we're going to be going over some startup stuff. So at this point, I just wanted to call out that I think a lot of our success was attributed to the culture that we had. And I don't know, some people might think that's kind of weird. I don't know. Depends if you kind of worked at startups and been able to see, or even just different companies and seen like what good culture feels like versus not. Again, it's going to be based on your own personal experiences, but I think that we had like a rock solid culture that it's honestly like one of the reasons that helped the company succeed. I think without the culture we had, even with more and or better, stronger engineers, I don't necessarily think we would have been as well off as we were as that company. So anyway, that's sort of the preamble to all of this. So the next part, and I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but it's like just how culture changes, right? So there's a few examples that I'm going to go through that I have talked about either on stream or in articles or in YouTube videos. And I think like there's more examples of these types of things because culture does change as a company's growing. Okay, so in chat, what are some indicators of a bad culture? Yeah, this can look very, very different from, because there's basically, if I do the inverse and say, these are all the great things about culture, just invert them. And there's probably tons I'm going to miss when I try to explain this. But one example of something that's not great for culture is like, I would say like this, like a feeling of complacency, and this can look different. So complacency in terms of how we are trying to innovate. So if we're just trying to say like, it's always just good enough and we're not really thinking outside of the box, I think that can kind of stagnate some of your innovation. So that's one thing. Complacency can also come from like a leadership and management perspective. So let's say that you bring on people that are not a great fit for the company. And it's kind of a weird thing to gauge. Like, well, what do you mean not a great fit? Well, what I mean by that, some obvious cases are, you've probably heard of like the prototypical like intelligent jerk. There's usually a different name for that. I don't know if YouTube will get mad at me. But basically someone that is very intelligent, they're good at what they do, but they're difficult to work with. And in fact, they make it very difficult for other people to work with them. So this is an archetype of person. You might know someone like this. Maybe you are this person, but basically they're smart. It's no one's judging like how much they know or how well they know it. But the problem that ends up happening is because they're difficult to work with. And that could be because they have expectations that are very high and they don't communicate well with others. They're kind of like gatekeeping certain things. They're difficult to collaborate with. Basically, if this isn't addressed early on, and you have management that's just okay with this happening, you have like one bad apple that kind of stagnates the entire team. And not only is it like neutralizing the effectiveness of the team, it literally becomes a net negative. And how you know this is that when that person is finally gone, the entire team becomes like almost exponentially more productive. And it's because the entire team can actually work. So those are a couple examples of culture. I would say like leading by example is a really good thing. Creating an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes. So a bad culture would be like, okay, so someone broke the build, or there was a bug that was found in production, and then like person gets fired for it, and it's like, okay, now no one wants to take any risk, like everyone's scared. Like that would be a bad culture. Sounds like almost made up, but I'm sure there are places that are like this. I've been very fortunate that I've never worked at a place like that. It's always been, people are okay with mistakes being made as long as we're reflecting on them and that kind of thing. You're also not being negligent about what you're doing. So those are a couple of ideas. So Express Package, if you have any more questions about that, if you want me to dive in any other directions, let me know. Happy to do that, but maybe that's a good start. So some of the things that will shift in culture are like, and it's going to be like one of the main things I'm talking about today, but this idea that you go, like for us, we were this scrappy startup, right? We were the underdogs. We have these huge companies that have monopolies on things, and it's kind of like this insurmountable goal, right? They already have the monopoly. Who are we, right? We got a cool product. It's pretty handy, but like they have all the users. They're the ones who are, they got their cash cows. We're just this random company that's tiny, and I guess the only thing we got going for us is that people like us. Like we have a tool that we're releasing and people are happy with it. There's good feedback on it. Hey, Burhan, good to see you. I see you on every platform now, which is awesome. Great to see you on the stream. So at this point, right, in our, like early on in the company culture, like I said, scrappy startup, we're underdogs. It's kind of like, I don't know, like it's the typical like kind of startup thing that you'll hear about where we'd stay up late, we're trying to get things done, we just want to ship value to customers, but we lived that. That was just what it was like for us, and no one forced us to do it. But when I talk about culture, like we were self-motivated to have this happen. And not every single person, especially as the company grew, was like that, but there was enough of us that like that was our culture, was to be like, hell yeah, we're going to get this done and nothing's going to stop us. It was kind of like, because it felt like we had nothing to lose, right? Like we are the underdogs. It's not like we're at the, we're not king of the castle and like when you're at the top, you have everything to lose. We had nothing. So we worked really hard for it. And I think that that's like something that definitely changes over time because, well, and I'll explain more about this, but I think what happens is that as you come into the company, as we've been achieving success, over time, right? So in the first year, the company's bigger, it's more successful. Second year, third year, fourth year, like it continues to have success because of this culture. And what happens, and this isn't anyone's fault, by the way, I want to be careful as I talk about this. I don't want to make it sound like I'm resenting anyone that doesn't feel this way, because I understand. Like, if you weren't part of it in the beginning, it can be very hard to get behind things and be like, hell yeah, this is awesome, because you didn't live through it. It's okay. And sometimes people can join in and they are feeling that way. So I just want to be careful that I don't want to make it sound like I'm resenting anyone for not having the same mindset. But what happens over time is you have more people that join that are kind of just used to the company being in a successful state. And like I said, nothing wrong with that. But what happens with the culture is that when people are used to it already being successful without all of the things that led there, the idea of like how much effort that takes and like what it looks like to reach there, you're kind of, I don't know, like you assume that you didn't have to do that. It's because you haven't seen it, and it's okay. But that changes the culture over time, because as it grows and becomes more successful, more people are sort of removed from this sort of origin culture that kind of started it off. And it's really hard. Like, it's really hard to keep that going. So some of the other things I've shared before, and this was like one of the, I don't know how many weeks ago this was, but I did a live stream, and it was like, who wrote this garbage, right? So this idea that when people are coming into an organization and they're questioning code bases or processes or whatever it happens to be, that you come into the org and you're seeing it with your own perspective, going like, man, this is ridiculous. Like, why would anyone actually do this? It seems like it's very broken, or the code's very bad. But again, what you're missing is like, someone wrote that or implemented that at a time, doing the best they could with the information they had. So you need to assume best intentions. Someone didn't go write that code and they're like, man, I can't wait for 4 years from now when someone joins and they're like, who's this idiot? Like, no one does that. Maybe some people do, but I don't think anyone's purposefully doing that. So the idea is that when you're joining a company, I think it's very important to be curious, but genuinely curious. So asking about code or why things are a certain way, I think, is a very important thing to be doing, to be asking questions. But it's all about why you're asking that question. Because if you're being curious, that's a very valuable thing. If you're just doing it because you're making fun of it, or like trying to show that you don't think that people are competent, I think that's the exact wrong idea. Nick Hodge, software archaeology can be fun, yet revealing reflects the organization. Yeah. And what's cool though, is even if you come across code where you're like, man, like, what the heck is this? This is bad. Instead of just as an example, instead of going into it being like, turning to, a buddy or messaging them on Slack or Teams or whatever and being like, dude, have you seen how bad this code is? I can't believe some moron wrote this. Because like your buddy who's been there for 10 years, they might have wrote that code. If you didn't check Git blame first. But the point is, instead of doing that, could you imagine going to that same person and saying, wow, I just came across this code. I'm really curious, like, how we ended up getting here. Like, and then trying to do, as Nick Hodge was saying, software archaeology, trying to understand, how did we get to this point? Because what you might learn is that there were very interesting constraints. I'm doing some foreshadowing here. Some very interesting constraints that led to making that decision. And if you want to go back and watch one of the live streams, like I said, it's all recorded on YouTube. In that, I gave some examples of, like, in one scenario, one of the best optimizations that we had put into our forensics product for performance, one of the best optimizations a few years down the road was the single biggest bottleneck for performance without any code change at that spot. It just became the thing that was lagging behind the most. So an interesting way to kind of look at things, but I think it's important to be curious. And then on, this is from Zoma on TikTok, facts, their actions lead to the new guys hiring. Yes. So you have to think that, like, if your culture is going to be evolving at a company, and this is just the way it is, it's okay. Like, as much as I enjoyed that very early stage culture, realistically, for it to hang around for indefinitely and never change and evolve, I don't think that's realistic. There are aspects to it that I think would be awesome if they continue to live longer, but culture has to change. So as it's changing, though, you need to be thinking, like, these individuals that are part of the new culture will be hiring more people, right? And then you have to be thinking, like, how do you, if there's a culture that you want to maintain, like, you can't dictate a culture. You don't just go to your organization and say, our culture is X, and then people are like, yes, that's the culture. Culture is like the result of how things are lived out. It's the side effect. It's the observed behavior, right? It's not what you dictate and then people do it. If you try to dictate the culture, you'll probably realize you'll have a bad culture because it's the side effect of what you're doing. So it's true. Your culture is going to change. The who wrote this garbage thing is one example of that. Another thing I wanted to share in this article, sort of the inverse factor that can happen. So the who wrote this garbage example is basically like new people coming in and being like, oh man, like how ridiculous is this? This other example that's probably more common people have heard about is like this phrase, it's always been this way. And this example, I like sharing because sort of this generalization, but I'm talking about it as an example, I think is interesting because when you put these side by side and compare them, this one is very much like when you do have people coming in and being curious. So they're kind of doing what I suggested in the previous point, right? Be curious, ask questions. You might come in and say, hey, like I noticed we do this thing, and like here's where it is in the code, and or whatever, we have this process, like just wondering like, you know, why we do it, or have we considered this other thing, like being genuinely curious, right? And then someone going, well, we've always just done it this way. End of conversation. Patrick on YouTube, basically what you're saying is culture's observed, not dictated. That's 100% correct. Yeah. There are things you can do to try and influence culture, things you can do to try and like encourage things within culture, right? But it's kind of like you don't control people, you don't make people do different things, but this is why I think having really good leadership that leads by example, like, can really help shape a culture, because people will try to emulate that behavior. And naturally, if your leadership is doing all the things that like you want out of a culture, I'm not saying it's going to work perfectly, but that generally helps people align to things that you might be looking for. So it's always been this way thing, I think, is very dangerous. It's very dangerous when you leave it at that. So a lot of the time when this comes up, people are being dismissive about it. So someone will be curious. They'll be asking like, hey, I noticed we do this thing. Like, why is it this way? And then instead of encouraging conversation and curiosity, someone just says like, it's always been this way. End of story. Move on. And then one of the big problems with this is that not only are you not being curious with the person, entertaining the, like, what does it mean if we were to reinvestigate that now? Not only are you not doing that, but you're also kind of teaching people, don't ask questions. And you're teaching them that because if they're going to ask a curious question and you dismiss it, then why are they going to ask more questions, right? Especially a new person. So I do think it's important. There's nothing wrong. If something has genuinely always been that way, you're allowed to say that. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying don't stop there. Don't be dismissive with it. Hey, it's always been this way. It started off for this reason, and at the time, we felt like this was the best decision. But based on your suggestion, I'm actually not sure now. Maybe that should be reevaluated. Maybe that is a thing we've already considered. I wonder if there's other opportunities. Like you can transform that into something that's open-ended and sort of continues like the curiosity instead of just being like, shut your mouth, we don't care about your ideas, move on. Like, it's not a spot you want to be in. Okay. So, and then yeah, Zoma on TikTok, facts, the newer generation can amplify and transform. Yeah, and like this is a thing, like you want to, in my opinion, you want to have a culture that embraces that. So letting people come in with new ideas, I think, is important. It doesn't mean that anytime someone's like, hey, we should try whatever, you just drop everything and go do it. But like, we should be listening. We should be curious with them. I think that's where I'm trying to go with that. The next part of the article was starting to introduce this technical infeasibility idea. So this is another sort of culture shift and something that I observed that I don't know if it just comes from like kind of like the air quotes like scrappy startup times. I don't know if this is something that is like a behavioral trait, a personality trait kind of thing, but I wanted to talk about it because I thought it was very interesting in that, again, I don't have, when I talk about things, by the way, I said this in a vlog I recorded earlier, but I don't have stats. So when I'm talking to you about things, like I'm not trying to say like, this is, I said like, it's not the law earlier. I also don't have stats. It's all anecdote. So if you want to challenge me on these things, that's totally cool. I'm not here to say, unless you literally see me pulling up like a fact sheet and like citing something and saying like, here it is, like it's anecdote. So just a heads up. So the idea around this, okay, let me answer Burhan's question here in the chat. So is it recommended to have someone between the CTO and developers at different points in time? Yeah, I think so. When we were a small startup, like when it was like 8 people, my boss was the CTO. And over time, so like shortly after, like I became a manager within months of working at the company, not because I was an excellent manager. It was because we were growing the teams and we needed managers and we didn't know what to do. So, so I became a manager very early, and so that meant for other people, like I had an engineer that I worked with that was older than me, had been in industry for significantly longer. I had just started, and he reported to me. Like you could imagine, that was a super weird feeling for him, but like he was not the kind of person that would be a manager, not because he's like not as good or something, but I think based on his skill sets and interests, that wasn't something that aligned with him. So immediately for that person, like he was no longer reporting to the CTO. So there was someone between the CTO and developers for him. Not long after that, what the company was doing was introducing, they were taking advice that was basically like build your bench strength. So if you're thinking about this, is like I think it's like a sports reference. I'm not big on sports, but you have your roster of people, your bench, and you want to build up the strength of the people on your bench. So you'd hire in people that do all these awesome things, so that you build a strong team. And so this company did that. They were trying to bring in they'd bring in like someone as a VP. So now CTO, VP, and then us as the engineering managers. Later on, they would kind of expand to have like directors between the engineering managers and even the VP. So like a scale thing gets introduced. But one thing that, like, if I could go back in time, if this were, it's not my company, by the way, but if it were my company, and like one of the lessons that I observed was like, I think there was a lot of missed opportunity to take people that were doing a good job and put them into those positions. And what happened was like they would hire in external talent a lot, and then that external talent genuinely was not a good fit. So the goal was to bring in someone awesome and kind of level up everyone. And what would happen is like someone would be brought in and it would be like a net negative effect. Then that person would leave, and then basically you would feel like the entire org like kind of like catch up and like and get better. So I think there was a lot of missed opportunity to say like, take someone who's already basically doing this and give them the chance to do it. Or back to what I was saying earlier around complacency, is like be more aggressive. If you're bringing in someone that's that influential, like I would say you got to be ready to make decisions like that to get rid of people if they're not good. But we were learning, like we hadn't done this before, right? So very interesting and challenging kind of thing. Thanks for joining, Zoma. I appreciate it. So Patrick, is it normal that a startup is giving a junior dev a task that nobody else on the team knows how to do, and they call R&D? Yeah, I think if you're asking if I think it's normal for a startup to do, 100% yes. Do I think it's awesome and the best way to do it? Probably not. But I think that startups and things like that can be very unique and different experiences from startup to startup, right? So in this example, is giving a junior dev a task that nobody else on the team knows how to do, is that good? I would say it's very situational, right? So you might have, and I've certainly worked with more junior developers that are very hungry to go learn things, right? Like they're passionate about problem solving, they're eager to do it, and they don't need a lot of structure, and you kind of set them off and they can do great. Is that common? Absolutely not. It's not common, I don't think, until for many people until they're more like at a senior level engineering position, because they've experienced enough to go like do that effectively. But I do think that some people can do this very effectively, even as a junior, but a very situational thing. So if an entire company's approach, just as a blanket statement, was, we got stuff and we don't know how to do it, so give it to the juniors and hope they, throw them in the deep end and hope they swim, I don't think it's a good strategy, but I think it is going to be situational. So hope that helps. Okay, technical infeasibility, agile, and estimates. So I am a person that likes agile software development. I don't like the rules of agile because I think that is completely counterproductive. So while I like a lot of the concepts of agile, I talk about agile more as continuous improvement because that's how I like to approach agile in general. I have seen Scrum work well. I have seen Kanban work really well. And I have seen many times where people try to make these things hard rules and processes that you must follow. And then the side effect is that you have Scrum that does not work well. You have Kanban that does not work well. And at the end of the day, when, at least from my lived experiences, when I hear people talking about like agile doesn't work, I think it's because you weren't doing agile. You were doing a hardened process and then labeling it as agile because someone said Scrum looks like this, go follow it to a T, and then you said that didn't work, so therefore agile doesn't work. I just think that's kind of bullcrap. It's like, I don't have another comparison off the top of my head, but like, in my opinion, doing things an agile way means that if like what's recommended for Scrum or recommended for Kanban, if that's not working, don't do it. Like, I think it's that simple. And if you're talking and working with your teams, you come up with these things. You're like, hey man, like we've been doing story point estimates. They friggin' suck. Like I don't get any value out of them. We waste so much time. And then you go, okay, well, what was the goal of the story point estimate? Well, it was so that we could figure out how much work we can do. And when we start thinking about that more, it's really just so that we can tell product like what kind of features we're going to have for the next release. Then you start asking better questions about this. Like, can we accomplish that in a better way? Can we work with product to give them enough insight for what's coming up if we're on course for that, if we're deviating? And can we do that without story points? Yeah? Okay, let's do that. And that's kind of where I'm headed with this conversation. So I had managed a few different teams. I would absolutely say that when I talk about like agile this way, I literally did all of the wrong things following agile because I'm like, I don't know what agile is. Here's what Scrum looks like when I read about it online. So I did all of the things where it's like put the rigid process in place. But I think one thing that was common and consistent was just like genuinely trying to listen to problem areas in retrospectives. And outside of that too, not just in a retrospective, but always trying to listen to where do we have problems and like, let's just do something about it. So in teams I managed, at least, I don't want to say very quickly, but after a couple of years at least, just started moving away from things like estimates. And I'm trying to think, like, I never went back to estimating things. There would be times where we're working with like our partner teams and their product owners would want estimates, and we would just say like, we can't give you that accurately. So like we could talk, like you might have heard of like t-shirt sizes. We could say like, that's going to be something that is big and ambiguous and we actually don't know, but that could literally be on the order of months. We just don't know because you don't even have enough context to give us. So we can't possibly give you a good answer. Now, for us, this worked well because we had really good working relationships, not only within the team, but with our product owners. They were always brought in. But what I wanted to share, and I'm already like 45 minutes into this, but the goal was this, for talking about this, was this cultural mindset of like, we don't talk about things as in like, here's all the reasons that it's going to hold us up and we can't get it done. We always approach things in the exact opposite direction. And what I mean by that is like, if product owners came to us and they said like, customers, like we've done the analysis, customers need this, or the business wants us to move in this direction, we think it's important. Here's like the reasons why. It's not like when I say we had a good working relationship with product, like we could push back on product, right? We could push back on them. We could ask questions. They would give us data. They would help us understand things. Like it was a good working relationship. And that meant that when product would tell us after we'd go back and forth, if they're like, and at the end of this sort of debate or conversation, they're like, and that's why we need to do this. hell yeah, we're doing it. So it wasn't a matter of like, oh, like that's going to take us months and months to do. Like, here's a 6-month estimate or a year estimate. We'd say, like, when do you need it by? And instead of finding all of the reasons to go push out the deliverable, oh, we're going to have to go refactor all this other thing. We have to go, we don't even know if that's feasible. Like, we have to go do this, we have to go do that. We're going to have to, we don't have tests in this area. This part of the product doesn't even exist yet. It's going to take us 2 years. Instead of going through every single reason why it won't work, we started doing the opposite. We started saying, like, what's the quickest way that we can get you some of that value? Right? And what we found was that by focusing the conversation this way, is that we could always move forward in a positive direction that would work towards adding value. And instead of being in a position where you're telling your product owner, you know, we're not going to be able to get that done for 8 months. And they go, okay, well, what about this other thing? And you're like, yeah, like, I don't know, another 8 months for that. This other thing, well, that's a year. They're kind of left with like a, okay, every option sucks, so let me pick the least of the crappy options. And then development teams go off and do it. And then 5 months go by, and then products like, customers aren't even talking about this thing anymore because we kind of missed the opportunity. So like, what about this other thing? And you're constantly trying to like work towards these goals that are super far out. And because they're super far out, things change over time, and you're like kind of like spinning your wheels in the long run. So in the chat, my own view, the value of any buzzword that doesn't have categorical or similar rigorous interpretation is suspect. What I've seen from Scrum, Agile, various estimate cultures is just a form of gatekeeping. If you're not involved in prioritizing which tasks get done and which do not, there's no point to estimates. Yeah, I think so. On this, I just don't think that estimates are like ever accurate. And I think the intent is good or can be good. Like, ultimately, people are trying to figure out how much work can get done in a period of time, because based on someone's role, especially depending on what kind of software you have, if you have a release where you need to get a bunch of features in, you need to communicate that with marketing and stuff like that. Like, I could understand why people are like, we need to know what to tell them. Like, they have to start on that material now. So there's a lot of reasons why I can see that people want it. I just don't think that a lot of the time the estimates are good. They're not realistic. But what I do think kind of like is kind of funny, but I think the only value I've ever gotten out of doing estimation meetings has nothing to do with the estimate itself. Like, I think I've never been in an estimation meeting where I was like, oh, that's a good estimate. I can't believe we came up with that. Can't wait to go work on that. Because odds are we could have finished the work by the time we finished the estimation meeting. But what I've noticed is valuable is hearing about how other people think about this thing. So if we could just repeat those things and not even put estimates out there and just listen to how people think about stuff, I think that's super cool. And the same thing with planning meetings, for what it's worth. When you're doing like strategic planning that's like over a year out, that plan is not going to happen. Like, that's the only thing I have 100% confidence about in a planning meeting that's like 6 months to a year out. The only thing I can tell you is that plan is wrong. Not that the whole thing is wrong, but that plan is wrong. Like, you're not going to do that plan. So again, the value is, in my opinion, is not how accurate the plan is, because it's just not going to be, but it's the conversation and learning the different perspectives about these things that I think is very valuable. So Elemental Magic's card game, thank you for that. I thank you for sharing your perspective on it. That's a couple of other things that I'm thinking about when you said that. Baran, the estimates put much pressure as we used to underestimate user stories, but it helps when the team has good experience. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like, whatever you're using, I think it's just about getting alignment. I've not personally seen story point estimates and things like that work well in any team I've ever seen, but I'm not trying to suggest that they can't work well. I've just never seen it happen. And that's why, like, I don't go into teams and suggest doing it, just because it hasn't been my lived experience. But yeah, Nick Hodge, funny how communication ends up being at the center of everything. And yeah, so this is a good reminder. Let me do, thank you, Nick, for the reminder. You're not a plant in the audience, although you probably should be at this point. Let me flip over to this. By the way, this is just a newsletter article I have. Course time. So I have a course on nailing the behavioral interview, and it's because as software engineers, we are hyper focused on all of the technical things. It's just how we are. I get it. People love to program, people love to have problems. But as Nick Hodge was saying, communication ends up being at the center of everything. And this is more and more obvious the more experienced you become as a software engineer, because you start going from like, hey, I can work on these small tasks mostly in isolation, into I need to collaborate and coordinate across the team, across multiple teams, across organizations. I need to work with other roles. So all of your like non-technical skills become incredibly important, especially as you become more senior. So Ryan Murphy and I created this course specifically around the behavioral interview part. If you, first, I imagine many people watching this have already, you're working at a job right now, you've gone through something like this. If you have not, the behavioral interview portion of your interview is not focused on anything to do with your code. It's not about system design. It's all about different sort of like behavioral traits. And Ryan Murphy and I try to cover that in our course. So I'll just put the curriculum up on the screen so you can see it here. We do have a portion I thought was pretty fun. We interview each other. Now, the answers to the interview, like mine, are made up. I think his are true, but we didn't tell each other the answers. So it's a real interview. And when we do the analysis after, you get genuine feedback that we give each other. So hope you find it interesting. It is on Dome Train, so I'll put a link in the chat if you're interested. And Ryan and I are working on more courses for Dome Train that are not specifically about C# and .NET. They're all going to be about career growth. So hopefully you find this kind of stuff helpful, but that's my little plug for now. So kind of got to find good opportunities to insert this stuff, because that's why we make it. We're trying to be helpful. So our team that we had focused a lot on all of the stuff that seemed like it couldn't get done. And it's funny because I managed several teams where it was almost always like this. So I'll share a couple of stories, and each one of these teams took this perspective that I was talking about, which was, we're not here to tell you all of the reasons why it can't be done. We're not here to tell you all the reasons why we have to push the deadlines way out into the future. We're here to tell you that we're going to start working on it, start making progress, and we will constantly keep you updated with where we're headed. So we changed our perspective from trying to say, cannot be done, to let's find all the ways that we can get something done. And more often than not, statistically for us, getting something done was really all that mattered. And we had a lot of success doing this. So the couple examples that I talked about in the article was, at one point I ran a prototyping team. And by the time I left, we were just sort of, I was doing a transition between managing two teams in particular, and we were kicking off the prototyping team again, sort of as like as a real boy. It was like a first class thing that was going to exist, because when we did it originally, it was kind of like a trial run. But the prototyping team we had originally was so successful at prototyping that we put ourselves out of prototyping jobs. So we approach things as, okay, there is a question to be answered. We're not going to take the things that are coming in from product owners and be like, oh man, like that's not going to work, can't be done, we're not going to do this. It was literally, okay, you need something done, we're going to start. And again, focus on all the ways that we could try to get things done. So we prototyped, off the top of my head, at least 2 products, at least, that became full-on things. So one of them was like, we have cloud acquisition. Well, I say we, I don't work there anymore. Company has like cloud acquisition software. So we prototyped that. We built the first variation of it to say, can we do forensics on cloud services? The answer, yes. I'm not going to go into the details of the other ones, but like, we basically had this queue of work and we blew through it faster than they could fill it back up. So we basically put ourselves out of work. But the whole framing was, we'll find all the ways that we can make progress, not the opposite. I'm going to talk about another team briefly. I forgot about this. It's kind of funny. I forgot about this team in particular until I was writing this article. And this team was kind of funny. It starts off with the name. The name was called The Expendables, which is an action movie if you haven't seen it. But the idea with this team was that they were able to, they as in like product owners and leadership, they were able to drop us into areas where we could go effectively get things done. And so I vlogged about this again, which is another good plug. I have another YouTube channel called Code Commute. If you are interested, you can check it out. I'm just going to put the link in the chat. So Code Commute, every time I drive to the office, so to the office and from the office, and sometimes when I'm driving back from CrossFit, I do a little vlog in my car. It's literally just me driving and doing a stream of consciousness, mostly about software and software engineering, sometimes like entrepreneurial stuff and things like that. But it's just a stream of consciousness. But I vlogged about this today. And the Expendables was a team very small team, and we didn't have our own area of ownership. So what would happen is that this is a pretty common thing, is like there are business priorities that have to get done. And what would happen is like a team would say like, well, we have our charter, we know what we're responsible for, and based on our team's priorities, like that work doesn't fit. And then another team would be like, yeah, also like that doesn't fit our stuff, like doesn't fit our priorities. But if you were to zoom out across these teams and look at it from a more of like a holistic view, the business is saying this work is critical and needs to get done, but we don't have a team that's sort of like able to schedule it. And I'm not saying that the solution we came up with is the best solution. I think that probably suggests there was maybe some things with product owners or even engineering culture where we should have done a better job to handle this kind of thing. I don't have a good solution for it. Our solution at the time was this team I had called the Expendables. So they would say, look, Expendables, no one wants to do this work. Not quite that way. It was more like other teams are tied up doing this stuff and it's not fitting in with their priorities, but the business needs this done. And we would say, hell yeah, okay, let's go. And effectively, we would parachute in without actual parachutes. It's mostly like a Git pull. We pull down the code, and we would go understand what had to get built, and then we would go build the thing. So yes, we would have to go make sure we're talking to the other team. We probably didn't do this effectively right in the beginning, but our team was basically focused on how do we get done what you're asking for? And it's not about excuses for all the reasons it can't happen. Like, we're going to go and we're going to get it done. So I should also be careful as I'm saying this. I don't mean to suggest the other engineers on the other teams wouldn't get it done. That's not my point. My point is that as an entire team, they were unable to prioritize this work. So that's what I'm trying to say. Not like they sucked or something, or they weren't capable, nothing like that. Just that our team had the focus and the mission to go say, like, we will go get these things done for you. It's not about finding the reasons we can't. And a lot of the time, one common theme with all of this is like, what we're not promising is that the thing that you're requesting, we're not promising you that we can 100% deliver it. We are promising you with 100% confidence that we will move in that direction. And like I said earlier, that framing was almost always completely sufficient to be able to move the product and the offering in that direction, offering value, because we could go repeat it later, or the business could pivot and say, that's good enough. We actually don't need to invest there because there's these other opportunities. And thankfully, we didn't waste another 8 months on it, because now we can go invest in these other directions. The last one I want to talk about is this mobile acquisition team that I managed. And this is, I think to this date, probably my most proud, like kind of sort of like career accomplishment. So at Magnet Forensics, I started with a colleague and really good friend of mine. We started the mobile acquisition team that they have. And the entire team started with the philosophy that I'm sharing here, which is like, there is a way and we will find the way. Not, it's technically infeasible. Because, and I should have been repeating this more throughout this conversation, when we take this framing of it's technically infeasible, if we would have been doing this more early on at this company, I can say, I feel like with a high degree of confidence, I don't think that this company would have succeeded. And I'm not saying that it was just us, because there were other situations where people would do this, but I think that was a part of the culture, trying to bring it full circle here. I think one key thing that came up at least enough in the culture was that we would find ways to get things done. And as long as we did that more often than not, which was sort of the opposite, is like, let me find all the reasons why that's not going to happen or take ages. If we could at least say more often than not, we will try our best to work in that direction, and we get it. As long as we can do that more often, I think that's what led to the success of the company. With the mobile acquisition team, there was I don't need to go into all the details, I guess, but basically there was a project that was pretty far off course. There was financial spend and a project that was just completely off the rails. And we kind of looked at the situation and we said, there's almost like no excuse for that. Because what we're hearing back from the people working on this project is like, it's literally like, it's technically infeasible to do these things that you're asking for. Like, it's going to take so much more time. And we're like, man, it's already been like, it's been 6 months and you don't have it working. You don't have anything working. Not even what we asked for, but you don't have anything working. So we're like, this is a problem. If it wasn't obvious, this is a problem. And we said, like, we think that this is feasible and we think that we can do it. And a colleague of mine and I set out to go try this out. And in a short order, we basically had a working prototype. We had it working. So the example was that we could take a mobile phone, so an Android phone. I could take a phone and plug it into a computer, and byte for byte, I could extract every single byte from your phone and have it on the computer. And we had a working prototype as we were taking off in an airplane, and we did our very first mobile acquisition in an in-house built product taking off in an airplane. So it was technically feasible, and we proved it. And we had gone back and we kind of explained our demo, and we said, we think this is absolutely something that we can continue to build. And if we build it with the expertise that we have, we're confident that we can have a successful product, because we have sort of the in-house knowledge to keep doing this, and we can iterate on this. And they said, okay, let's give it a shot. And that's where I ended up forming a team around this. And every single step of the way was essentially things that looked like they were technically infeasible. So we had to do things like using known and sometimes lesser known exploits on Android devices to be able to do full byte for byte images. We had to do, passcode bypassing. Again, for what it's worth, we're not hacking. This is meant for law enforcement, government, forensic investigations. A lot of the time, just for the record, for people that get uncomfortable with this stuff, we were trying to help people solve crimes that involved pedophilia. So we were helping to rescue children. So if you're like, hey, it seems kind of sketchy that you're going through people's phones, first of all, not us. Second of all, it's law enforcement. Third of all, it's to help save children. That's why we're doing it. So for us, it was nonstop. Is this something that can be done? We don't know, but we have to try. We're not going to sit here and say, can't be done, push it out. We're saying, we're going to try. And we did this nonstop. And I want to go back to saying that we had really good working relationships with our product owners to be able to tell them, look, we're working on this thing. We're actually not sure if we're making progress. Like, we don't, it's been a week, it's been 2 weeks. We're not sure. Do you want us to pivot to something else that you have in mind? Or do you want us to keep trying? Because we will keep trying. We will keep doing it. And I would be lying if I said that some of these advancements didn't take half a year. We're not going to go into it saying, oh, it's going to take half a year. Like, that's why we shouldn't do it. We said, we're going to find a way. And sometimes it took that long. Sometimes we would get a couple months in and say, we got to pull the ripcord on this. We can't do it. But we tried. And what would happen is we'd revisit something later, and all the learning that happened carried over into being able to have a successful product or some other feature. TikTok always likes kicking me off. They're like, oh, you're idle. Like, I'm absolutely not idle. Talking to a camera. I can see the audio being recorded. So I think for us, it was always that framing of we don't know if we can get it done, but we're damn well going to try. And more often than not, we were successful. Again, maybe not with the full 100% thing that we predicted in the beginning that was being asked for, but we would be successful. And I genuinely think that if you invert that culture and you go into your meetings, whether it's a Scrum meeting, some planning meeting, or anything else, and you have engineers telling product owners, it's not going to get done because it's too complicated. It's going to take a year. It's going to take whatever. The reality is the engineers might be right about that. It might be. But I think it's more important to have a conversation, not about tell me all the reasons why it can't be done. Change the conversation. Tell me what you can do and give a constraint. So this is the last part I want to talk about. When I say give a constraint, a section that I wrote in the newsletter, because I read this a little bit out of order, but a section that I wrote is titled Constraints Breed Creativity. And I didn't coin this, and I'm not the only person to talk about it, but I like talking about it because I think it's important. And it's this idea that consider, and I think some people will resonate with this, if you've ever worked on what we call like a greenfield project. So you're at work or a hobby project, whatever it happens to be, and someone's like, we need to build this thing that does X. And you're starting from scratch. You can pick any technology you want. You can pick your favorite language, your favorite database, your favorite everything. You pick your best friend to go work on it with you. You have a greenfield project, and all that we know is we need to accomplish X. How much time is it going to take? I don't know. Just get it done, you know? Just go build. That kind of thing, you can be creative for sure, because you get to pick all these things. But in that example, I was trying to articulate, there's no constraints. You have one goal, and I didn't constrain the technology choices, the programming language, who you're working with, the time frame, anything. You just have some goal, go build a thing that does whatever. And I think that this might sound a little extreme, but I think that's like I don't want to say the laziest, but I think that's like the least creative type of like software development that we can do. It sounds kind of backwards because you might say, well, Nick, like you can literally pick anything you want and get creative. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, but like you don't have constraints. And I think that for some people get frustrated when they have to work in legacy code and stuff. And it's because it's hard. Because you have constraints. You literally have to start making engineering decisions. You have to say, yeah, I know the best pattern to use here would be to switch everything over to dependency injection, and we could refactor this and write all the tests. But guess what? You have a time constraint, and you're not going to be able to do all that. You can't freeze the code base for 200 other developers to just say, oh, let me go clean this up. Don't worry, but let me just clean it up. Don't deliver any features. It's going to take me 2 months. There's no constraints. You don't get to do that. It's just not real. So it's hard because it's made by idiots. Hey, man, I'm one of those idiots that built that legacy code. But I think the point here is like when you have constraints put in place, you get creative. So when I was talking earlier about, hey, look, like we don't know if we can do it, but we're going to show you everything that we can do, we would come back to constraints. And we would say things like, what do you need by when? well, we want this feature, we want it in by the end of the month. And we're like, okay, like, can we do that? Like, we don't know. But like within a week, we can tell you like how confident we feel or where we can get to, right? And we would just constantly have these conversations. So the idea was like, if you're not constraining things, then you're not going to end up solving them in creative ways. And I think that that needs to come up more in our software engineering conversations, because when you have product owners or whatever it looks like where you're working, and you have people asking for functionality, for features, for bug fixes, if there are no constraints, then you will, of course, have engineers coming back and saying, well, to push the time out, push it out. Because you're not constraining it any other way. It's an interesting exercise, and I encourage you to try it. Not saying it's the right thing to do, but to try it. Instead, when that's happening, so if you're working in a group and people are predicting it's going to take us like 6 months to do it, literally try this. Say, what could you do in 2 weeks? You don't have 6 months. You have 2 weeks. What can you do? And you'll have people going, oh, it's impossible. We literally can't do it. It's impossible. Can't be done. But like, that's in this exercise, that's not an option. You have 2 weeks. You have a 2-week time period. What can you do? And try to see if people get creative, because sometimes what happens is when we have these constraints in place, people are saying, yes, in the current paradigm that we have, it is impossible. And like I said earlier, they might be 100% right. In the current paradigm, it is impossible to do. What if you change that? What if you start thinking outside of the box? So one of the things that had been on my mind recently is, and I'm not going to share the example from work. I'll share an earlier one also from work that I lived through that was pretty interesting and was successful for this very reason. And then I'm going to kind of wrap up. So as I'm wrapping this up, by the way, if you have other questions and stuff you want to ask, please let me know. I am watching the chat. Happy to answer anything that's coming up. But this last example I want to give is on the previous team I was on that was for deployment. We had, so we do OKRs at work, so objectives and key results. And if you're not familiar with this kind of thing, OKRs are this idea where a key result itself is something that has like a quantitative outcome. So you can say like, we improved something to go from X to Y. It's a measurable thing with like goalposts, right? You move something from X to Y. It has a scale, right? So if you didn't get all the way to Y, but you got like halfway between X and Y, then you were 50% to your goal. So OKRs are measured and designed this way. There's more to it, high level. We had a key result that was about driving some metrics that we had in deployment. What they are doesn't really matter. And when we were doing the planning, my manager at the time, and I'm new to the team, by the way, at this point, my manager at the time had said, I want this to be the goal. And I said, okay, like I'm going to go back and talk to the team about this, but like there was other key results. So I'm going through them with him. And when I presented that one to the team so we could work through and see what that was like, I had one person on the team that was like, that's impossible. It's simply impossible. And they had a lot of experience, and they know from their experience, they had already tried to optimize this stuff. They said, we already came a long way. Already come a long way, and here's how far we got. And now you want us to go that much further? They said, it's going to be impossible. But they said, okay, like the thing is, and with this individual, they weren't, they were trying to help me. They were trying to be like, look, like, I know you're new here, so like, let me tell you, this is going to be impossible. But they weren't trying to like stop the team. They weren't trying to say like, no, screw you, the team can't do this. They were just trying to say, look, man, like we've already done a lot of this, and to stretch that much more, like I'm telling you, it's not going to be doable. But we set out, and we had to go set up a lot more observability to go make sure that we could go see things properly, to measure different scales of things. And sure enough, over time, we chipped away at things, and we achieved that goal. And I wanted to share this one because if we would have just taken that initial feedback, it can't be done, and we say, okay, I guess we have to pivot to something else, we wouldn't have achieved it. In this particular case, what we didn't do was we didn't necessarily change the entire paradigm. We didn't say, okay, like if we re-architect this, maybe we can achieve that. That conversation came up, right? We talked about, we do things this way today. We came up with brainstormed a couple of different ideas that maybe would work. But what we did in practice for this example was that we just incrementally chipped away at it. And the more observability we put in place, the more insights we had, like, hey, look, this is for performance optimization, just for what it's worth. That's the detail I'll give. So we were finding these spots where we were like, hey, look, like that's actually way slower than it should be. But we didn't have the observability. So we didn't have like a paradigm shift, but we actually chipped away at it and achieved the goal. Now, if that came up one more time and someone said, reduce it by another 50% or something, then I might be skeptical at that point. But the point is that we went into it being like, we actually had talked with leadership and said, that's going to be a stretch. It's going to be a stretch for us to do. And they said, that's okay, because we want you to try. Okay? And the team knew that if they didn't achieve the goal, it's not like we were going to lose our jobs, but that's our goal. And we're going to try to figure out as a team how we get there. And we did. We measured and we incrementally chipped away at it. All the engineers worked on it. It was awesome. So again, I just want to share with you that my philosophy here that I think can really help is like, number one, constraints can be your friend because you can get creative. And number two, try to frame things as more of like, what can we do versus all the ways that it will not work. And I think if you try those things out, give them a spin, I think you might see some cool cultural shifts where you're working. So that's it. End of story. But if people do have questions, please let me know. Happy to try and answer them at the end here. I am going to check to see if there's anything else I wanted to share. I don't think so. I mentioned Code Commute, which is the vlog I do when I'm driving to and from the office. One of the things I talk about on Code Commute a bunch is even stuff outside of work for me. So I'm just going to switch this back over. I work on the SaaS I'm building called Brand Ghost. So Brand Ghost is what I use for posting to social media. I have been using the back end of this service for a long time now, because if you see me on social media and what I'm posting and stuff like that, it's done through Brand Ghost, and now we're putting a front end on it. And then other people, if you want to get into content creation, if you have a small business and you want to be able to post content more effectively, Brand Ghost is what I am building. So on Code Commute, you'll hear me talk about this a lot. That's why I was saying you'll hear more of the entrepreneurial, like startup side of things on that vlog, because it's also top of mind for me. So that is Brand Ghost. Joy in the chat, how long have you been doing this? Which part in particular? Let me know what you mean by this, because I can answer your question more effectively. As you are writing back the more specific thing you're interested in, I have been programming for over 21 years. I have been in industry for 14 years. I have been managing software engineering teams for 12 years. 8 of those were managing within a startup, and 4 of those at Microsoft for big tech. I don't know if you want any more details. Content creation, just under 2 years now. The live streams in particular, I started at the beginning of this year. So those are a bunch of times. Cool. I am doing one more pass over the chat. I don't see anything else, folks. Please, if you still are in chat, or if you're watching the recorded version of this, let me know in the chat. I know some people responded to the poll and the survey I did for times, but let me know if this time worked well for you. I think it's a very sustainable thing for me to do it at 7 p.m. PST instead of 9 p.m. So if it worked, that's great. If not, let me know. I'll try to see if I can adjust if there's a majority. And the last thing I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, but there's way more people on now. I am going to be streaming tomorrow morning. So that's 7 a.m. PST. Let me just put the link in the chat actually. So let me find it, because then I can just put a link to the next stream. So I'm going to be migrating. It's not going to happen all in one stream, but I'm going to be migrating my WordPress blog into a Blazor blog engine. So I'll be starting that at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Burhan, I'm planning to start working on BPO. I want to help my team be on that standard. Any advice on it? BPO, what is BPO? I don't know the acronym. Business process outsourcing. No, this is interesting. I guess I don't necessarily want to force you to kind of share like what processes, but are you able to share which processes in particular? Like which process you plan to outsource, because that might kind of change my perspective on it. I don't have a ton of experience with outsourcing business. I'm trying to think. I've had experience that did not go well with outsourcing a project where the entire project was managed externally. So the development was all external. And then I think what was supposed to happen and why it failed pretty miserably was that I don't think there was a project manager on their side. And I think that we had a project manager that was not informed they were supposed to be managing the project. So as you might expect, that led to a big discrepancy. So I have not seen that work well in my experience. Trying to think, I think it really depends on what the business process is that you're trying to outsource. And I would suspect that if it's not a strength that your current team has or your business has, it could be a great opportunity. But anything that's not in-house, I want to, even if it is in-house, like communication is going to be so important, and making sure that everyone's on the same page. So if you're taking a critical process to your business and taking it outside, like just think about the impact of that, right? So I want to give you another example, because I was talking about brand ghost and stuff. If social media as a business process and someone doing marketing and social media presence and stuff, branding, if that's not a core part of your business, can that be outsourced? Sure. Right? But you don't want to be so detached from it that you have no idea what's going on. So I think that's an important consideration. I am not an Alex Hermosi guru, but one thing that he said that I thought was very interesting, and not every business has this luxury, but if you think about a business process that you want to outsource, he talks about a sort of an inverse strategy, which is like, or it moves to an inverse strategy, which is, hey, look, we're going to outsource this to you, but we might even, if you're willing to, we will pay you even more money, but we want to shadow you. We want to learn from you as you're doing it. So again, the social media example, you might say, like, social media and branding is not a core part of our business, so it makes sense to outsource it. But long term, like, you will always have that dependency if you never build up the skill set internally. So if I can channel what I understand from Alex Hermosi effectively, his approach was, let me outsource it. Let me learn everything I possibly can, and it comes at a premium, but it's worth it. You have to go find the right place, but then if you learn everything they're doing, now you can actually bring that back in-house and do it effectively. Not only just effectively because of the cost, but you don't have to translate business domain knowledge to some other group, because you can do it all in-house. Like, I feel like the way that I would look at this is there's probably an efficiency loss anytime you have to outsource something. Okay, and when I say efficiency loss, I don't mean that, like, as a result, therefore you shouldn't do it, but I think anything outsourced will come with some efficiency loss, and if that efficiency loss is less impactful than the gain you get from outsourcing it, it makes sense, right? But if that efficiency loss is outweighing the gain you're going to get, I think that's probably something to look at. Now, how easy is that to measure? I don't know. And it's going to change from process to process. So something to think about. But But yeah, I hope that helps. Sorry, I don't have like a lot of like anecdotal experience to kind of back all that up, but something to think through. Okay, folks, I don't see any other questions. Just checking again across the chat. Looks like no. Thank you all for tuning in. Reminder, 7 a.m. PST tomorrow morning. We're going to be looking at some .NET code. So I'm excited and also nervous because I get stressed out thinking about my blog and having to migrate stuff. Like, it feels like it's like worse than moving houses. Like, no one likes doing that, but it's got to happen. So thanks again. I appreciate all of your support, and I will